So what's the big problem with wealth creation? How do people like us, who didn't inherit a boatload of money, who are investing and building wealth from our own blood, sweat and tears, how do we invest in a way that gives us remarkable results and become financially free before retirement age? I don't know about you, but I am sick of hearing from wealth gurus and experts who don't walk their own talk and prescribe strategies that are a one-size-fits-all approach. For self-made people like you and me, I'm here to tell you that you don't need to be superhuman or already wealthy to reach financial freedom earlier than 65. This is the Alternative Investing Podcast. Hey guys, welcome back to the podcast. It's really awesome to have you tuning in. Now, today's podcast episode I've titled Why White Collar Professionals Look Rich, but in fact struggle with wealth building. But I guess the big question that sits behind this is, does the amount of money that you earn automatically guarantee wealth? Now, I want to tell you about a client of mine called Jerry. Now, obviously I'm changing his name, but this guy was a doctor. He had great income, but no assets outside of the home. And as a younger man, he was just so busy trying to climb the corporate ladder that he decided that as a, responsible white collar professional, he should go off and get a financial wealth advisor to help him. And what he described was he got a lot of very fancy looking reports with graphs and charts, and he was told to commit a certain amount of his income towards putting into whatever it was that the financial wealth planner was advocating. He was told he would get an actively managed portfolio of shares. And one of the questions that I asked him when he first came to me was, I looked across his portfolio of shares, I looked at his managed funds, I looked at the value of his house, and beyond that, and maybe a couple of very nice cars, he didn't actually have much in the way of other assets. And from a net worth perspective, I guess I was slightly taken back because I had a sense of how his career had progressed. I had a sense of what he had earned over time. And I guess just from my view, I was thinking, wow, this guy must be worth, multi-millions, like maybe even tens of millions. So I was pretty shocked to see that his net worth was considerably lower than that. Now, there were a few things that kind of came up during the conversation. One was his wealth planner had maybe taken a couple of left of field unnecessary risks with the capital that he had been putting there. So that kind of resulted in less growth than might otherwise have been the case. And then, the result of, all of that was me saying, well, I know you've earned reasonably good income. I know that you have had somewhat of a lavish lifestyle, but in spite of that, why is it that you don't have more in the way of assets? Now, generally speaking, when I'm kind of looking at diagnosing where people are right now and what might have brought them there, there's usually two things that come up. Number one, perhaps they inadvertently made a mistake on an investment. Maybe they put their money into something that was a little higher risk than they should have, and they lose capital, and that sets people back for sure. The second reason why people often don't have the asset or the asset base or the net worth that you're expecting is that they're just too busy. So they outsource it and they just don't give it much thought until the runway to retirement is sort of looming and they're thinking about, oh, crumbs, what am I going to do? And maybe they're not even thinking from the viewpoint of my net worth is or isn't substantial, because obviously not many people, and I certainly feel very privileged, they don't get to see other people's personal balance sheets. And so I guess over time, as I've seen what people do, how they earn and how they convert it into wealth, I have a pretty strong grasp on what sort of net worth people should have for the run rate of income they've had. When I first started speaking with Jerry, he was actually already at retirement age. That was the really sad part about this particular story. But he honestly felt he just couldn't retire. He had saddled himself with a role at the steering wheel of a big business. And his fantasy at that time was, geez, it would be great to have one day a fortnight off. It wasn't lost on me that he was quite worn out. He was tired, but he felt he was in a relationship where the burden of earning had fallen on his shoulders. And so he had to do what was necessary.
he, based on the conversations that we had, were kind of on the timeline or timescales of saying, look, I think I've got about 12 years left in me. So this is obviously not ideal. Now, after reviewing all of his financials and where he was at, I could see a few things, and I guess I want to share those things with you. Number one, I could see that traditional investments, where essentially the plan was growth over time, was completely going to leave him locked into the active income that he currently had. There was no other choice. He was going to, in fact, have to work those 12 years. The problem that I had with his plan was that it was going to be about aggressively throwing as much of his premium income into those retirement accounts as possible, as aggressively as possible, so that he could get to a point where he had amassed, and I'm just going to call this, for want of a better word, a savings plan, a glorified savings plan, with a bit of compounding hopefully baked in there. But he was going to end up in a situation where he had no choice, but he was going to eat the cow. Now, eat the cow is the expression. It's a bit of an unfortunate expression. Apologies if that offends anyone. But it's an expression which basically says you create this pool of assets, or this asset base, and then you have no choice but to gradually sell it down, eat the cow, in order to survive while you're not earning active income. I could also see through this exercise that if he took just a fraction of his net worth, his assets, and I'm talking about maybe 20%, maybe 25%, and he put that into an asset class which would deliver that sustainable, predictable cash flow, and I'm talking super conservatively now, of around 8%, then that would shortcut his timeline to reaching the goals that he had massively. And I'm talking about maybe he could do it within 12 to 24 months. Now, when I asked him, because, he still liked his work, but when I asked him, how would he feel about working a 2-day week for fun, maybe even on a consulting basis, maybe that would appeal more than the, what he had in mind, which was the 9-day fortnight. He actually started to get really teary. And the reason I am telling you this story is that this kind of retirement plan is why, or what, most high-income white-collar professionals face. They spend their entire careers focused on climbing the corporate ladder, achieving some level of status from a vocation perspective, earning really good money all the while, and thinking that if I abdicate my decision making to someone who has a bit of paper that says they know what they're doing, that I will have enough and that I will be okay. I can tell you now, the vast majority of people I speak to who are white-collar professionals have fallen massively short. And frankly, that kind of retirement strategy sucks for anyone. I hate the idea that anyone gets to that point in their life where they don't want to work anymore and they have no choice but to do exactly that eat the cow strategy. And you want to know why? Because number one, if you have to eat the cow, it means you have to be hyper vigilant about your spending, because when you die matters. If you live too long, you're going to end up with no cow left over. And so what it leads people to do is actually end up at the wrong end of their life, having to penny pinch and be really careful. The second thing is that if you end up in the situation where you are eating your cow, it erodes your ability to support others. So you're so busy making sure there's enough oxygen in your own tank that if your kids come along, or if people come along and they want help. So a really good example of this is, let's say your kids came along and wanted help with a house deposit or help with a loan or any of those things, you might have to say no. And you might be that person who couldn't imagine not being in a position to help your children or nephews and nieces or loved ones or causes you care about, whatever it is. So that's another big pain point. And I guess, with those things in mind, I think the lessons around this particular story are really obvious. The first one is you cannot expect to build meaningful wealth if you outsource the decisions to someone else. And I've said that a couple of times already, but I really, really want to drive this home. The best case scenario that I've seen is effectively a savings plan with a little bit of compounding behind it. Now, the problem with that is not so much that it's not effective for building capital. It's totally effective in many cases for building capital. But in the end, if you do not have a plan to extract a decent amount of cash flow, it means the amount of capital that you have to amass, the net worth that you have to create in terms of investable assets, has to be absolutely enormous. And let me explain. The second point I want to make is the difference between, let's say, a typical dividend yielding portfolio where maybe you could earn, let's call it 2 to 4%. Let's imagine you had $1 million. That 2 to 4% would be somewhere between $20,000 to $40,000. Now, for a lot of people who are on the pension, that is what they have to live off. But if you've slogged away your whole life and that's what you have to live off, if you have worked your ring off, you have tried to put money aside for your, retirement or for some part of your life where you don't want to work anymore, that is a dismal amount of income. Meanwhile, if you had $1 million and let's say it was earning you 10% as a net return, that's $100,000. That is an absolutely whopping difference. So I really want to make that super clear. The income stream that you generate from your asset base at the time in life where you want it, which has to be predictable and sustainable, you need to be thinking about that sooner. You can't wait till D-Day and just go, right, so we have X million dollars in assets, but how am I going to create an income stream from that? You need to be thinking about that now. The final point that I want to make is that high income does not guarantee wealth. Now, clearly, Jerry is one example, but there are so many people who fit into the same boat. One of the things I know that is true of being a white-collar professional, and I certainly felt this before I exited that sort of space, is that there is pressure to live at a certain level, to enjoy the finer things in life.
You've been listening to the Alternative Investing Podcast. If you're feeling frustrated that despite doing everything right in the property investing playbook and you're no closer to financial freedom, then head on over to incosiwealth.com to learn more about how you can use alternative investments to catapult your investing income and blend strategies to shave decades off your timeline to financial freedom. See you on the next episode.